to her presentation, which is on instruction that matters for the AI generation. Over to you, Victoria.
Hello. Thank you for that introduction, Lior, and thank you for everyone to take time to listen to some of our ideas. As Winkler mentioned, I myself, I am too a classroom teacher, and I've been teaching for a while already. I work for the IB program, and I am very interested in teaching thinking skills explicitly across the curriculum, and that's what I want to talk about today, pretty much. Just allow me a minute to share my presentation. Oh, what happened here? Wait a second. Sorry about that. Wait, there is something going on here. Okay, here is my presentation. Okay. Okay, so instruction that matters for the AI generation. Again, this is about a presentation out of experience and what I've done and I've reflected on with my students in the classroom. Okay, so this is what I believe matters today. And again, I'm not an expert in artificial intelligence, but I am an educator that cares for these processes of deep thinking and for my students to engage in tasks that are relevant for them to then become more insightful, I think. I teach language and literature, and that's why I'm going to be talking about large language models and how do I use them. I know that there are so many other things in artificial intelligence, that there are so many other models that do visual arts and different outcomes, but right now we're going to focus on language and language production. And my session is going to be like, there are some premises, and the first one for me is we need to teach students and prepare them for a world in which AI is everywhere. I mean, we cannot just avoid thinking about it or not using it. It's everywhere and they need to be ready. So that's something we learned last year as well. And I believe teaching should emphasize inquiry-based learning, conceptual understanding all across the curriculum, contextualization in local and global scenarios, and must be clearly guided by learning outcomes. And the session models what AI resilient instruction looks like, focusing on deep thinking skills, transparency, reflection, and the development of source analysis skills and meaningful tasks. So I'm just going to give you some examples of what I do. The basics, this is something that we have been talking about for a while, so I'm just going to mention it, which is backward design or understanding by design, authentic assessments, again, contextualized in the real world so that it makes sense for the students, flipped classrooms, again, assigning pre-work for them to be ready for classroom experiences, and visible thinking and metacognition. So again, thinking about how we learn, thinking about what I know, what I need to do better, and being very explicit about the specific instruction that we want them to handle and, what we want them to actually produce. For me, that's very important. So I like this model of MIT because I believe it's pretty comprehensive. So we always think about learners, learning outcomes, assessments, and learning experiences. We always do that. Today, I believe we need to incorporate some questions here. Is it like how do they use AI? What do they know about AI? Every kid today has access to internet, or most of them have access to internet and computer and cell phone, and they do have access to artificial intelligence. So what can they do with it? What do they know how to do? Then the outcomes, the question for me is, what can AI already do for them, right? So if I am giving them a task, my first question is, what in this task can be just easily answered, resolved with artificial intelligence? And then what else can I do with this task? What else can we accomplish? And then about assessment, how can AI assist them in solving the problem, right? So where is it that they can just come and use AI to fix the problem that we're giving them in an assessment? And then in terms of learning experiences, How are they learning about artificial intelligence? So what are they learning about artificial intelligence? Because artificial intelligence is, for me, and we learned that again last year in the Hatter seminar, is and should be a learning outcome too. It should be in itself a learning objective for us. Like they need to incorporate it. So again, like not thinking about it or trying to ban it, or I don't think that's the conversation anymore. We have moved to now what do we do with it? How do we teach them? How do we help them to actually grow their abilities in using the tools? All the presentations were super insightful, so I hope that mine can add some examples of what I do again. So here I have something that for me is crucial, and we have talked about a lot too, is that learning must be in our designed, I believe we must always keep in mind the terms of instruction that we're using with the kids. So here are some examples of the ones I use for literature and language. Of course, they change depending on the subject. So you have them to the right of the screen, like analyze, explain, describe, evaluate, summarize, classify, predict, compare, and contrast, okay? Synthesize. There are so many there. But again, the first thing for me is like we need to have a taxonomy. And if it is not defined already by the school or the program, you have to, define it by the subject that you're working with and be very clear about that. But most educators know that. But my point is, how do we do this explicit? Not just saying, okay, let's analyze the text. How do we do it? How do we use artificial intelligence for the kids to become more skillful at analysis, for example? Then we have AI for modeling structure. I think that's very helpful. That's something that Winkler talked about, which is what are the specific language clues, the specific outlining examples. How do we scaffold the learning? How do we manage the tasks? How do we divide the tasks? How do we teach them how to use the tool for them to take advantage of it? So I'm going to give you an example of that as well. We have reading and text annotations. So again, like when we talked about learning outcomes and when we talked about evaluating an outcome that artificial intelligence produces, I believe it's very important for students to, from a very, very early age, be able to analyze the word choice, the tone, the purpose, the new words they find. I believe that we cannot stop doing this, never, never giving them paper and then annotating and highlighting and asking questions. This is very important, reading skills. And sometimes we take it for granted. So my premise is never take it for granted because kids need the instruction. They need to actually be given the specific language clues and the guidance for them to become better readers. So go back to paper, reading, annotating, taking notes, asking questions. That's very important. And something again that I've seen everywhere that people talk about, but I like to give examples too. I have some materials that I'll share. It's like individual and oral activities that are individual and interactive oral activities are very important today in every single subject. For language and literature teachers, this is very common. And in every classroom, we have these kids presenting, right, for us. But I want to think about other activities that are more like going from just giving them a task from writing or memorizing or taking a test, preparing a well-structured oral assessment that is individual or interactive, interactive oral activity like a Socratic seminar, for example, that's very relevant for me, I believe, today as well. I've worked with this in class with my students, and I see how they grow and how they develop their ability to express ideas and how their writing improves and how their thinking skills improve, right? So here again, I just want to give some of the examples. Okay, so first, for thinking skills, I teach teenagers from 10th and 11th grade, but I decided to design an example for 4th grade just to challenge myself. And because I talked to one of my nephews and they're obsessed with some video games, and I thought, okay, if we think about personalized learning, how can I use something they like to maybe, for example, practice one of these skills? So that's what I want to share now. Let me see this one. Okay. Let me just move this. Okay, so again, for fourth, fifth grade language and literature class, I must teach them how to write comparative analysis, right? Like they need to know how to compare and contrast something, which is one thinking skill that we all, I think history, science, doesn't matter. We need them to be able to compare and contrast elements. So I gave them a prompt. I gave ChatGPT, I'm using ChatGPT in this example. I gave a prompt that says, write a paragraph comparing and contrasting two video games, Grow a Garden and Minecraft, which kids love, right? And my example here is if it is individualized learning, maybe I can just tell the kid, okay, what do you want to compare and contrast first? Because in my subject, they will need to compare and contrast two different characters in a novel, right? But I want to start with modeling, and this is what I mean when I want them to use ChatGPT or any other large language model to first practice structure and understand some thinking skills that they will need to write later a paragraph like that. So write a paragraph comparing and contrasting two games, Grow a Garden and Minecraft, which kids are obsessed about. So you see, ChatGPT gives me a little paragraph and it has some elements there, right? And considers different aspects. Okay, now I ask the kid, is there anything else you would like to add to the response? Do you agree or disagree with the response? There is evaluation in there. And I want to be very clear with the kid and say you're evaluating the response when you think about how it can be better, how it lacks, or how it has something else that is not relevant. So I want to say first, we're comparing and contrasting in here. Then questions for reflection so that we have specific moments where we stop and reflect about what the tool gave us. And then I have something else, a second prompt. Again, I would guide them, imagining a class in which I guide the kids for this. So every kid can choose something different to compare and contrast. Prompt number 2, make a table classifying the differences and similarities previously identified in that paragraph. And then the ChatGPT gives me all these aspects, you know? And in here, I'm telling the kids this is analyzing. Analyzing is finding the parts of a whole. So now we're finding the different aspects, and you have already categories of analysis. We're going to use different language or this language for them to, grow conscious of what it is actually to analyze a response. Okay, so ChatGPT gives me different aspects, okay, and gives me more aspects than the ones actually written in the paragraph. So something good there that would be like, do you find any category, any element that is not in the paragraph, something else that you believe is relevant, or something that is just not there. For example, economy and monetization is not in the paragraph, but the ChatGPT gives me that in the table. So why is it that the chat doesn't follow my instructions so we can discuss, with the kid and develop a little bit more their thinking about this. So that now we have categories of analysis and different aspects that the kid can, think about. Okay, so now we're doing evaluation. We're doing, well, comparing and contrast, which is the outcome, but we have evaluation here and we have also analysis of different elements. So we have categories. Okay, now we guide, and we can guide the activity very simple in a very simple way. Do you think the paragraph includes all those aspects listed in the table? Explain. Find the aspects listed in the table in the paragraph. So there's some abstract thinking in here. So select your aspects, categories of analysis from the table, or create your own to write your own paragraph, comparing and contrasting these two video games. And again, the kid can use the paragraph and he can use the table and all this language. But again, in my experience, it works when I sit the kid with pen and pencil on a piece of paper and pencil and pen and say, okay, now you write your own paragraph, a little paragraph. It doesn't have to be very complex, but you have an idea now how to do it. And now you're going to find 4 different categories that you want to compare and contrast, or maybe something else that you want to do because you don't agree with the categories that the ChatGPT gave you, for example. And something else, I can ask ChatGPT to, and I can guide the kids to ask and give a prompt, like use some of the transition words and expressions in the table below, or ask ChatGPT to give them some expressions for them to show similarities, showing differences, introducing points, examples, and evidence, qualifying statements, summarizing and concluding. And then the kid has like this kind of a puzzle with different aspects that they can come and sit down and write a paragraph, right? And in this case, I believe we guide them into thinking how to actually compare and contrast, which is in the end my learning outcome for this imaginary unit, which is writing comparative analysis. Then how does it look in my classroom? Well, at the end, this is how it normally looks. Compare and contrast the characters of George and Lenny and of Mice and Men. How do their personalities, strengths, weaknesses, and dreams shape their relationship and influence the events of the novel? So now, well, the kid now has some background, right? To say, okay, so these personalities, strengths, weaknesses, and dreams are the categories of analysis. And now I'm just gonna write it down in the paragraph. Or maybe the kid wants to use something else, and then you say, okay, maybe you want to use different aspects of the characters that I didn't consider in the essay question, and now you do it in your own way. I think that would be a way. In for science, I asked an example to the ChatGPT because I'm not a science teacher, but compare and contrast plant cells and animal cells. How are their structures similar and how do they differ? Or help them to carry out their specific functions. So this is a very simple task that you can pretty much work with kids in class. I can see this happening again with my older kids and with different content, which we agree, all of us agree, the content today, I mean, content is more an excuse to exercise thinking skills and abilities. And in literature, well, the content is the novel, but in any other class, the content will be something else. But again, we guide the thinking for them to going back and reflecting on what the ChatGPT produced for them. I want to show another example here, and this is something I found very useful. And this is about like it's more. Hey, in general terms, I found MIT has this good structure, which is AI Resilient Learning Experience Design Toolkit, and they give you like examples of different classes they have, right? So what I did is I used again, I think in this case it was Claude, yeah, it was Claude AI, and I used it and I gave it the structure and I said, well, I am this teacher and I want to I teach language and literature, and I want to use this structure to create my own planning. And why is this relevant and why is it different? First of all, we define our learning outcomes. Yes, all the elements of a normal plan, but we want to be very conscientious and explicit about the terms of instruction. That's what I believe, like analyze, evaluate, synthesize, and create. Okay, so those are my learning outcomes. And then in my plan, I include like AI use, right? Sometimes I allow it, sometimes I don't allow it, depending on what I want. And sometimes I require it, which I think is important to consider the possibility of requiring AI for a task, just like what I showed you last time. Why? Because I have an objective. In that task, my objective was to model structure, right? And this chain of thought for creating something at the end, which is a simple paragraph. For kids, when we talked about analyzing and synthesizing, and we do it all the time, we all do it, right? But my point is, I believe we have to be more explicit about it and guide them because they need to understand what they're doing. And that is metacognition properly, right? It's not just about, okay, the kid can analyze, but the kid needs to know that he is analyzing and that what analysis looks like and what it means. Why? Because today, these tools, they can do it, right? They can just, okay, analyze with ChatGPT something, but what does it really mean to find all these elements, all these categories, and then for writing more complex essays in the future or for researching for real when they grow up and move on, right? So I believe that is a good example. This structure is useful, I believe, because again, like when you require the task, you're going to be very explicit about how to use it, and then take some time and say, we're not allowing the task for this particular moment in the classroom. And I believe that in the classroom, the flipped classroom works, and it has worked for years precisely because they do some pre-work. So how do we know that they're not using any ChatGPT or any AI tool in the pre-work? Of course they do. Of course they will go home and do it. And sometimes they're going to use it as a shortcut. But in many different cases, as Winkler and the other presenters mentioned, it is a way of empowering students. So we need to give them the structures. That's my point. So how to use it, give them specific language stems, how to ask the questions, how to add the prompts. What do I want with this task? So that there is a particular way of using it, right? So they learned about AI, how to use AI, and also they learned about the subject that we are teaching them. And they learned the content, which is not just memorizing, but creating something out of their experience with the content in class, which I believe is relevant for them. Okay, so we move on here. Let me present again. Okay, so in terms of individual and interactive oral assessments, I mean, this is again for language teachers. It's very common. We do it all the time, but again, it should be very well structured. I shared with you some of my resources that you might want to take a look, and if it works for you, perfect. You can add, you can change, you can think about it. Something else that I believe is very important in here and that you saw in that example is the reflection checkpoints. More than ever, students we need to stop with them and reflect about what they're doing. Again, metacognition is crucial. And we talked about metacognition all the time, but do we really do it? Do we really stop sometimes every lesson and say, okay, at this point, we're doing a reflection checkpoint and we're doing it precisely because we need to think about the outcome of the AI, or, I mean, it must be part of our class. So focus on reflection and metacognition taught explicitly across the curriculum, I think is very crucial. Some of the key points to be answered by students with respect to thinking and reflective skills include, what are my present skills in this area and what evidence do I have of my development? And what skills practiced in class can I improve, right? In class developed learning experiences such as reflection journals and portfolios were very well. Of all of my students, I remember when I started with this, they have the portfolio and they have their reflections and they have their corrections, which is very important for me too. Like you write, you correct, and you start seeing how you grow. And in here, we're incorporating the AI tools and their outcomes and the evaluation of those outcomes. So we have different stages for reflection is the planning and inquiry stage, which is the curation stage when they use the tool and you allow the tool because they're going to use it just like they use the internet for researching and finding information and sources. We're going to talk also about a source analysis skill that is crucial as well for them to start growing conscious about what a good source look like, because if we continue curating the sources for them, they do not develop the skill. So I believe that it's important that they develop the skill of, discerning whether a source is relevant or not. And that's the way they're going to come to evaluating the outcomes and say, no, I believe this is not good enough. There is something that's lacking. We need to add something. Then we have the analysis and evidence stage. In this case, I believe they shouldn't be using the tool. They should be working in class. And something that has worked for me brilliantly, my students have gotten excellent results, is by just writing by hand in class when there's time for that. So first, yes, you can use the tool and gonna help you and guide you to use the tool for you finding a lot of information and clues and words and expressions and outlining and thinking about the resources that you have been reading. But then when you sit and analyze and do your own thinking, you need to sit down and write. Okay, you need to sit down and write. Then you have a rough draft stage. And I have some questions regarding each of the stages. And then the final draft and reflection on authorship, right? Which is like, this is my piece. How did the tool help me? What are my real ideas? I believe that kids are very proud of their outcomes at the end when they see their own ideas there reflected in the piece. And in this case, for reflection checkpoints, I want you to also see some questions that I believe are relevant. And these were generated also with ChatGPT. So we have planning an inquiry stage. What problem or question am I trying to answer? How did AI help me brainstorm? I believe that at this point, when they are reflecting, it's good if they have a journal, a reflection journal that they, just write like we used to do by hand. I think that we need to go back to those moments of just sitting down, and thinking about your own learning process and to do it with purpose in class and in a sustained way. I mean, because I've learned in my practice again, many years, more than 15 years teaching teenagers is they need consistency, right? So if we do something, I believe in my case, Socratic seminars was a thing for them, or it's a thing that we always do. So they start learning and they know the task and they improve and improve. By the time they graduate, they become a lot better at discussing texts and annotating and finding elements and thinking about how the text is posing interesting questions about the world. And I believe that's the relevance, or that's the instruction that for me matters for them. Why? Because we are actually working with them every day in the class for them to become critical thinkers. That's what we want. And we talk a lot about critical thinking, but how do we do it explicitly? Again, implicitly, we all do it all the time, but how do we do it explicitly? How does it look in the class when the kid knows that he is analyzing or that she is actually evaluating or that she is synthesizing? What are the words that I need when I need to actually compare and contrast an elements? What are the language clues that I need to make sure that I have evidence of understanding, So we have this planning and inquiry stage, then analysis and evidence stage. We have these questions. How did I check the accuracy and reliability of AI information? How did I do it? Where did I go? Did I consult my teacher? Did I go to classroom materials? Did I go online? And where did I go? Where did I get that information from? And how do I know is relevant? What if evidence supports or challenges the AI output, right? So where do I find the differences? How do we improve the output? Is it enough? If it is not enough, why is not enough? So those are good questions, I believe. Did AI help leave out a key perspective? How did I add it? These kind of questions help the kids start thinking about the tool and understand the shortcomings also of the tool, right? Because sometimes they rely too much on it and they say, okay, it's done. No, it is not done. It's just part of it. It's just an outcome, but how can we improve it? Then when you have a rough and draft stage, you have also some questions in here. Again, there's some questions that come to mind and I added more with ChatGPT and I thought about it. And from a previous IB a workshop that we also, I gathered some other questions, but again, you can add your own for your students, depending on their level, depending on, your subject, depending what's relevant to you, right? And then the final draft and reflection on authorship stage. What did I learn about myself as a reader, writer by using AI? How is the final product authentically mine? Where is my voice? I always talked about voice to them. It's like, okay, I know that using these tools looks like magic and you just get something done, but where is your voice? Where is the authenticity? Who are you in here in this piece? Where can I read you? Right? What are your ideas? What did you learn? And that is when individual oral assessment is very powerful to me. When you sit with the kid and start asking these questions instead of giving them a quiz, right? So like sitting down and writing a quiz, memorizing information or recalling something you said in class isn't relevant at all anymore. So it's like talking to them, sitting down with each of them and discussing 5 minutes and asking these sort of questions and ask, they can, sometimes what I do is I record them. So we have a recording and they add it to the portfolio digitally. So we have a recording of their reflections. I believe that's very relevant as well. Okay, let me see. What else do we have here?
Sorry to interrupt, Victoria, but we're going to have to wrap it up in a minute.
Okay, just to finish. Source analysis is skill, very important. Again, you have some resources that I shared with Lior that can be adapted easily with artificial intelligence for any level, but we cannot forget about this. I mean, kids need to know specific frameworks of authorship, tone, purpose, intended audience. I mean, go through it with your students, not just language and literature, not just history, but every subject across the curriculum. And that's how I believe we impact the way they think about how knowledge is constructed in the end, so that they can be, again, learners and also producers of new knowledge and creative ways of solving problems. And those are my conclusions. And I think I have a second. No secrecy, no fear. Aim for transparent, reflective, inquiry-driven learning. Prioritize deep thinking, conceptual understanding, and contextualized learning so that matters to them. use AI intentionally, not to replace thinking, but to strengthen metacognition, creativity, and understanding explicitly. And students develop pride in their thinking, not in AI-generated answers. Our goal is to build learners that are literate about AI and that are strong and powerful and or who are empowered by their own vision and what they learned in our classes. I believe that's what matters. So thank you. Thank you for your time and attention.